Thanks for coming. I hope the computer lasts throughout the presentation. First want to thank Christine Tomei for inviting me here, and everybody here at Ashkal Alwan has been very nice. This is my first time here in Lebanon. What? Oh. Okay, so this talk is called On Nietzsche's Second Brain, All Prejudices Come from the Intestines. It's actually based on a text for the Tamawuj website. I believe it went up yesterday or today, I'm not sure. I cover some of the issues that the text covers, but I also address certain issues that the text doesn't. So I hope the text and this talk are complementary. So you'll take the time, maybe if you have more interest, to read the text after hearing this talk. So the topic of this text and this talk is inspired by one sentence written by Friedrich Nietzsche. And just to introduce Nietzsche very quickly, he was a late 19th century German philosopher. The picture on the left is him in his 30s. The picture on the right is his grave in an East German town called Rücken, small type village town. And Nietzsche obviously is famous as a writer, and he was also he also suffered from a lot of chronic health ailments, such as migraines, other eye problems, stomach issues, intestinal issues, chronic diarrhea or chronic constipation. Today, they would probably diagnose him as having IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, amongst other issues. My point being that Nietzsche had a lot of physical problems that actually derailed his academic career. And he spent a lot of time, much of his later life, looking for the right climate and the right diet that would alleviate his chronic health symptoms. And I think it's because of his health issues that he probed so deeply into the body and how the body affects consciousness and the mind and even morality. So we'll get to these issues later. So as I mentioned, the text and this talk is based on one sentence. And I provide the sentence here in its context. It's from Nietzsche's very last work, which was an autobiography. And maybe some of you have read this autobiography. It's a strange one. Oh, I forgot to add that for the last 10 years of Nietzsche's life, he was insane. All right? He had all these health problems, and then the last 10 years he was insane, and he had to be taken care of by his mother or by his sister. And so if you read his autobiography called Ecce Homo, How One Becomes What One Is, it's a very strange autobiography. I recommend it if you have time. It's not so long. And again, it's his very last written text before he went insane, although it's arguable that he already was insane when he wrote this text. So here is the sentence, and in its context, I'll read it to you. Sit as little as possible. Do not believe any idea that was not conceived while moving around outside, with your muscles in a celebratory mode as well. All prejudices come from the intestines. Sitting down, I have said it before, is a true sin against the Holy Spirit. So Nietzsche's point, one of his points in this paragraph is movement, right? Movement, to get inspiration from walking. And I've also included the original German. So for intestines, Nietzsche used the word Eingeweiden, which you can translate as intestines, but one can also translate as guts. So if we retranslate Nietzsche's German to English, we can say, all prejudices come from the guts. And in that sense, it actually makes a kind of sense to us, right? A sort of folk wisdom. But what exactly does it mean? So we'll go back to the origins of the study of human physiology and gastroenterology. So around the turn of the century, 19th century to the 20th century, two British physiologists by the name of William Bayliss and Ernest Starling, they coined the term the law of the intestine. And the law of the intestine is essentially, as they write, excitation at any point of the gut excites contraction above, inhibition below. This is the law of the intestine. So essentially, like Nietzsche's quote, the law of the intestine is just movement, right? Digestive movement. Digestion is not us just absorbing nutrients from the things that we eat. It's also movement through the system. This is the law of the intestine, a foundational law of gastroenterology, which is the current study of our digestive systems. So later, doctors and scientists and physiologists then confirmed the law of the intestine. And they also showed, like Bayliss and Starling showed, that if you separate the digestive system from the central nervous system, right? The central nervous system is essentially our brains and spinal column, that the digestive system would still function. Other organs, this is unlike other organs and systems of the body. Once they're separated from the body or the central nervous system, they die. But the digestive system will keep on going. The law of the intestine continues. And they did these experiments on, unfortunately, laboratory dogs, rats, and guinea pigs. I don't think they tried this on humans. But located within the gastrointestinal tissue are embedded about 100-some million neurons. So this amount of neurons is about the same as a cat's brain. Right? A cat has about 100-some million neurons. And actually, there's a cat here, I think, right, named Amber? I think it's named Amber. I forgot. So because the enteric nervous system, enteric comes from the Greek enterikos, which means intestine. Because it can function independently of the central nervous system, and for other reasons, the enteric nervous system is dubbed the second brain. And I know that in English, and also in Chinese, there are idioms that, to the effect that the intestines are the second brain. This, again, is a kind of folk wisdom, conventional wisdom, something we know. So within the digestive system, there's something called the gut microbiome. So micro means small, biome means community of living things. So inside our primarily large intestines reside trillions of microbes. Most of these microbes are bacteria. There are some fungi and archaea and viruses, but the focus is on bacteria. And this bacteria has been dubbed either a friendly bacteria or more precisely commensal bacteria, in that this bacteria helps us out with certain things. I don't like to call bacteria friendly, so I'll just use the term commensal. This bacteria then helps us with digesting certain foods like starches, fibers, etc. It also builds nutrients when we digest. One example is B vitamins, in particular B12. So B12 is a vitamin that is only created by bacteria. And we can create it in our own bodies, but it happens pretty low in the digestive system, so we don't absorb very much. So we have to get B12 primarily from animal products. So this is the reason why vegans and some vegetarians need to take B12 supplements or B12 fortified food. This commensal bacteria in our guts then also keeps harmful bacteria away, right? It prevents us from getting food poisoning more often than not. So it also controls our metabolism for storing and using energy by regulating our appetite and weight. So now scientists have done studies that somehow this bacteria in our guts has something to do with obesity, right? If the bacteria in your guts is somehow imbalanced, it can cause obesity, supposedly. It also, the good bacteria, commensal bacteria also decreases inflammation in our digestive system. But actually, when we eat anything, there's a bit of inflammation. But this bacteria then trains our immune system to say, hey, accept this type of food, don't get so inflamed, right? So it helps us out to eat different types of food, more diverse types of foods. And it also stimulates brain growth. So it's been shown in certain studies that children who have an imbalance of gut bacteria show certain mental deficiencies. So we actually need this gut bacteria for our brains to function and grow. There are about 1 or 2 kilograms of gut microbes in the average person, and this is about the weight of our brains. And there are at least thousands of bacterial strains in our guts. Scientists just maybe 5 years ago thought that there were only maybe hundreds of strains. But now they've shown that there are thousands, and then in the future, they probably will show that there are even more, since this is a very young science. So our bodies actually have different sites of microbiomes. So for instance, this picture is people who have, primarily Americans, who have donated a sample of their bodies of some sort, and you pay a little bit of money, and this laboratory will send you a report of your gut bacteria and other bacterial balances. And each dot represents one donor. So you see how the donors sort of center on what is normal, right? What is normal, what is average. So there's oral bacteria, an oral microbiome, and some of this bacteria then protects us from letting, let's say, like staph bacteria from entering our throats and infecting our throats. But most of the oral bacteria actually causes cavities and bad breath. The skin has bacteria on it that also protects us from certain harmful bacteria, right, from entering our bodies and infecting us. But then again, this bacteria that is already on our skin can actually enter our skin if it becomes cut and infect us with this bacteria that usually lives on us. See, that's why bacteria, I don't like this term friendly bacteria, because even the bacteria we normally live with can infect us. For women, there's a certain microbial balance in the vagina, and then our focus today is the guts. So we go down to the brown section, right? And I also want to focus on the guts too, because these other types of microbiomes on our bodies don't affect our minds in the same way that gut bacteria does. Okay, so how do we get this gut bacteria? So it's determined largely from your mother. And when you're born, if it's a normal vaginal birth, at that time, the baby then inherits a lot of the mother's gut microbiome. It's been shown in studies that babies that are born through cesarean section show an imbalance in their bacterial, in their gut flora, which then needs to be supplemented. It obviously also depends on your birthplace, because different types of bacteria reside in different places. And each place has a different cuisine, right? Different types of foods have different kinds of bacteria as well. Nutritionists and scientists, they tend to think that the balance of our gut flora is determined largely in the first years of our lives, so around 3 to 4 years of age. But actually, the gut microbiome changes throughout our lives, especially when we try different diets. We move to different countries, right? It can change, but the idea is that the general balance stays the same. Genes have something to do with it as well, because some people have genetic disorders in which bacteria don't like to live in their large intestines. And I should add the question, why do the gut bacteria live in our guts in the first place? So from the evolutionary point of view, supposedly early humans and proto-humans, they ate plant material, animal material, and this bacteria resided naturally on things in the world. We ingested it, and then the bacteria, I guess, realized, if bacteria can actually realize anything, that, hey, you know, the large intestine is dark, it's warm, it's safe from predators, and so this bacteria co-evolved with us through time. This is the anthropological explanation. This gut bacteria then signals the brain. It affects moods and well-being. And then how do we know this? We know when we have food poisoning. When we have food poisoning, it is the digestive system, the gut bacteria, that is signaling to the brain that something is wrong. We know then that it can affect our moods. Usually, when the digestive system is going okay, we forget about it, right? But when it goes wrong, we know it goes wrong, and it has a very specific effect on the way we think and the way we act. I know this because one of my talents is, of course, food poisoning. It also can affect dreams. So you know this too. If you eat particular foods before you go to sleep, it will affect certain dreams that you have. Exactly. So spicy foods, you eat or a whole lot before you go to sleep, it will affect your dreams. So how does the bacteria then communicate with the brain? It does on what's called the gut-brain axis. The gut-brain axis is primarily, here, I can hardly see. The straight line there is called the vagus nerve. It's generally along the spinal column. So the gut bacteria, right, the bacteria in our guts, communicates then with the neurons inside the enteric nervous system, which has a straight shot right to the brain. This is the quickest way that the gut bacteria communicate with our brains. The gut bacteria can also shed certain molecules into our bloodstreams, which then more slowly reach our brains, affecting our moods and the way we think. So this is called inter-kingdom signaling because this is actually communication between us, our souls, and a different species, bacteria. So we can actually communicate with this bacteria, inter-kingdom signaling. The medieval philosophers, they called the will, right, our free will, the appetitus rationalis, the rational appetite. So even for the medieval philosophers and for ancient cultures, the ancient Indians, the traditional Chinese medicine, they knew about a certain connection between our digestive systems and the way we think, although they didn't know about the gut bacteria at the time. So there is a new procedure for certain intestinal issues and even some nervous disorders. So what fecal microbial transplantation is, it's actually a euphemism. It's a shit transplant. So you take shit from a healthy person and you inject it into the unhealthy person. And I know maybe some of you have just heard of this, but for the past 10 to 15 years, this has actually become a fairly common procedure for many illnesses. And for some illnesses makes sense. So I personally knew people with Crohn's disease, right? Crohn's disease is a disease where it makes you have to go to the toilet 20, 30 times a day. I mean, this is really a debilitating illness. Colitis is inflammation of the intestines, which also causes people to have diarrhea multiple times a day. Fecal microbial transplantation has been shown from a healthy person with a healthy gut microbiome transplanted to the person with the illness to actually cure the illness. But it's also been shown to work with disorders like MS and Parkinson's disease, right? So there's more. The gut bacteria is not just responsible for the health of our guts, but there is this direct connection to our brains. But what's most interesting to me is that after the transplant of one person's shit into another person, there is a change actually in behavior in the recipient. This is more easily seen in laboratory mice. Because laboratory mice, their brains are much smaller than ours. They live a much less complicated life than we do. So scientists, they raise what are called germ-free mice. These are mice raised in sterile enclosures who have no bacteria in their guts. This obviously doesn't happen in nature. But after the transplant from a healthy obese, well, if obese is health, from an obese human being into a germ-free mouse that was lean, was skinny, the germ-free mouse began to eat more and became overweight and obese. So the behavior of the donor changed, right, because of the transplant of the excrement. Another example would be koalas and pandas. When koalas and pandas are young, they eat their mother's excrement because supposedly when they're born, their intestines are sterile. And they need this bacteria to digest the very hard foods that they eat. So for example, for koalas, it's eucalyptus. For pandas, it's bamboo. And from what I understand, Australian scientists have tasted koala excrement designed for their kids. And koalas' mothers will actually make a minty excrement so their kids will eat it, right? So they get this bacteria. I myself have never tried this excrement, but you know, Australians, I guess. I don't know if there's any Australians here who've tried this. The picture here is of fecal matter of someone's shit. And actually, you can go online and you can buy someone's excrement that you can either inject right, you know, into your rectum or take it in a pill form, right, and eat it to treat your own symptoms. This procedure, this idea of eating excrement has actually become more and more common. I'm really not joking with you if you've never heard of it. Maybe some of you out there have tried it. One day I will try it. I just haven't yet. So about the changing of dispositions, the changing of behavior for the recipients, right, of this fecal matter. What's interesting is the effects on the moods. This is what I find most interesting. So we know that the gut microbiota affect our moods. And we're always in some kind of mood, even if the mood is imperceptible. Even if we don't know what the mood is, we are always in some kind of mood. All right, so what are moods versus emotions? Emotions tend to have a particular target. Moods don't necessarily have a reason for being or a target. So for instance, if I get an email that a family member was in an accident, right, I have a particular emotion. This emotion is caused by the information I received from the email. But I could be in a particular bad mood. As they say in English, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, right? You just have a shitty day. This happens. You're just in a bad mood the whole day, and there's no reason for it. Well, actually, the reason is your gut microbiota. But whatever mood that you're in colors your world. It affects your sense of what's important in the world. So, for instance, if I'm in an optimistic mood, an adventurous mood, I will be more willing to try different kinds of food. If I'm in a pessimistic, a negative mood, I will be less willing, obviously, to try certain things. But to be in the adventurous mood, you have to be receptive to even trying anything, right? You have to be, moods are very important for us to notice anything in the world. Moods allow us to actually see meaning in the world. And because of this, moods alter our behavior, right? If you're in a bad mood, you have different behavior than when you're in a good mood. If you're in a good mood, you might want to dance, right? The mood has a very direct effect on your actions. So the gut feeling, the gut sensation is a kind of mood. And for psychoanalysts, they might call it a kind of affect. Nietzsche would call it a drive, right? All kind of different words for the same thing, the gut sensation, the effect of the gut microbiota and the digestive system on the brain. And moods can be so strong that they become disorders. So we probably know people in the developed West, depression is very common. It's a particular mood disorder, and you know that depressed people see the world differently than non-depressed people do. Neuroses and such. Hunger, the last talk was about hunger. Hunger is a mood that we all know, again, and you know that if I'm hungry, I notice everything that people are eating. I notice the restaurants that I walk by. If I'm full, food and restaurants, right, recede from the world around me. So you see how this mood of hunger changes the way that we see the world. So from a neuroscientific, in their neuroscientific terminology, they say salience. Moods affect our sense of salience. What is salient in our world? What we notice. So this is a very famous picture made famous by Wittgenstein of the duck rabbit. And what you see, I think the computer might have died again, but what you see, either the duck or the rabbit, right, is not based on any type of rational deliberation. Reason, right? As humans, where we use reason. This is what differentiates us from Amber the cat. But we're not using our rationality to figure out if this is a duck or a rabbit. The interpretation, the gut interpretation of the duck or the rabbit, it comes from the digestive system. At least this is my interpretation. Here's a picture from a recent protest in Berkeley, California, and the way you interpret what's going on in the picture before you use any type of rational deliberation, right? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? What is going on? Your first inkling, just like the duck rabbit. It's the gut sensation, right? This is something, again, we all know. But obviously our guts don't think the way our brains do, right? We don't think with our guts in the same way that we think with our brains. So according to current neuroscience, what they call the seat of executive function, the most important human type of rational types of activities that we make are centered here at the front of the brain, and it's called the prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for the planning of complex goal-oriented behavior, decision-making, rational interpretation, impulse control, search for meaning, direction, purpose, right? Personality, short-term memory, and even moral feelings supposedly are generated here at the fronts of our brains. And what's important to me about the prefrontal cortex is that it and the brain itself actually doesn't mature until our mid to late 20s. So just think about that when young people vote or protest. So we go back to Nietzsche's original sentence. All prejudices come from the intestines. What does it mean? So this is what it means. The prejudices that come from our intestines, right? It's these gut sensations, these gut feelings, the bacteria using the enteric nervous system, the neurons in our guts, which when they fire is the same type of electrical activity that happens when our brains think. The changing of our thinking, our moods, stress, emotions, behavior. These are, in one sense, what I think, in my interpretation, what Nietzsche means. But the brain, this relationship is one of reflexivity, right? Up and down. Reflexivity. This means that the isolation of cause and effect is not so clear, right? Because the brain can also have a certain effect on our digestive systems, right? We can control, despite what our urges might be, we can control our diets. I can go on a very strict diet, right, of only eating potato chips, even if my guts are opposed to it. Veganism, right, as a moral choice is a way of the brain overriding the guts. I can also control when I go to the toilet most of the time. So we probably know those times, especially when you have food poisoning, sometimes the guts override the brain. But prejudices can also be seen from a hermeneutic perspective. Prejudices actually make it possible for us to function in the social world. So for me, for instance, to get on a plane, to go through security, all these things, I have to have certain preconceptual ideas of what things are, of how to cross the street, of how to get in a car, of how to queue. These are prejudices in a hermeneutic sense, in a positive sense. We don't have time to go through all of this, but if you go into the work of Martin Heidegger or Hans-Georg Gadamer, two German philosophers influenced by Nietzsche, you can see how prejudices are also good, not just bad. And well-being, this is a term that a lot of New Age hippie health fanatics like to use, this term well-being. What is well-being that is caused by the guts? Well-being is just the idea of the digestive system working in a way that we can function in society and we don't just lie there and do nothing. This is well-being. So we have to get clear on certain terminology. Am I going too quickly? Because we don't have a whole lot of time. There's a famous quote by Nietzsche. Well, Nietzsche is famous for aphorisms. He has many famous quotes, but here is one. A thought comes when it wants and not when I want. So the ancient Greeks already knew this with inspiration, right? Inspiration comes from the muses. You can't will to have a thought. Thoughts just occur in your mind. Similarly, gut feelings cannot be willed. They just occur. And like thoughts and gut feelings, decisions cannot be willed. I cannot will to make a decision, because not making a decision is making a decision, right? Decisions cannot be willed. They either are made or not made, which not making it is actually making a decision. The picture differentiates then between rationality, right? This is the seat of executive function, the seat of practical reason, right? What makes humans unique. And the one with the heart is intuition. So some people think that the gut sensations are intuitions. They can be, but intuitions can actually be caused by memories, stored in emotional memories, stored behind the prefrontal cortex, called the amygdala, the small place behind the prefrontal cortex. It can actually be based on memories. Intuitions can also be wrong in a way that gut sensations can't. So we have to differentiate between thoughts, intuitions, and gut sensations, right? Drugs affect our moods too. This, any of us know who drink coffee, right? Smoke cigarettes or smoke cannabis. These drugs affect our moods too. So bacteria in our guts can be seen as a kind of drug, right? A functioning drug inside our guts that it's affecting our minds. And then I claim they actually affect our souls, a commensal drug. So even now, nutritionists, then they've coined a term called psychobiotics. There are certain foods, supposedly, you can eat that will affect your mood, well-being, your brain, in a way that drugs do. I brought one, it's called Mood Plus. I bought this in the United States. It has a couple of strains of bacteria that I guess come from somebody's excrement, probably some hippie. I haven't opened the box yet, I haven't tried it, but I'll try it later. Like our actions, gut feelings are not true or false, right? Statements or beliefs or judgments as reflections of the world are true or false. It's a category mistake. This is in philosophy you call a category mistake. It's a category mistake that's to say that gut feelings are true or false. So American media, mass media, they always like to blame, for instance, Trump's actions or views on the world as views from his gut. But the gut sensations are neither true or false. Gut feelings are either felt or unfelt, decisive or indecisive. And then the pictures below are just some memes I found on the internet of saying, always trust your gut feelings, right? They never lie. Again, I think this is a little bit too strong as well, because gut feelings can actually go against projects that you've planned ahead in your life with your seat of executive function, with your brain. For instance, let's say that I've made a rational decision to come here to Beirut, Lebanon, and to give this talk, which, by the way, I've never given before. This is the first time. And let's say I'm super nervous, and my guts are telling me, don't speak in front of all these people you don't know, right? In this sense, the gut sensation is working against my rational inclinations. So you shouldn't always trust your gut sensations. What you should do is try to understand them. We can sort of manipulate them. We'll get to that with things like this, I guess, and eating yogurt, as they say. But you can't always trust your gut sensations. But what's interesting to me is when gut sensations are decisive, when we act on our gut feelings. How does this affect free will, for instance, right? So if I get the gut feeling that I don't want to do this talk, and I run away and I hide in the hotel, right? Am I doing this out of free will, or is the gut bacteria in my intestines, has it determined my behavior? This is the question that I have, and we'll get to this. So we go back to Nietzsche. another famous quote by him, and one that was very influential on Freud. For the longest time, conscious thought was considered thought itself. Only now does the truth dawn on us that by far the greatest part of our mind's activity proceeds unconscious and unfelt, right? Most of the activity that happens here, supposedly rational activity, supposedly the use of practical reason, whatever makes me human, most of what goes on in here is unconscious and unfelt. Well, how does this affect free will? How does this affect moral responsibility? German scientists and American scientists, they've done studies where they've taken people, and they put them in MRI machines. MRI machine is a magnetic resonance imaging. It essentially maps a brain. I don't know if any of you have been in one. I actually never have. I find it really frightening. But they put these people in an MRI machine, and they gave them two buttons, one button or another button to press. And American experiments and German experiments have shown that when a subject is told to choose a button, there is already electrical activity. The neurons are already firing up to about half a second before the person is even aware of having made a decision. So what this means is that many of the decisions that we make have already been made by our bodies somewhere before we even know we've made the decision. So how does this affect our free will, right? If the decision has already been made before I've made it, up to about half a second. So for the apologists of free will, and then one question is, why is free will important anyways? What if we're all just, everything is cause and effect, and this physicalist interpretation of the world is just, we have no free will, we can't choose, we're just being pushed along, right? Well, if there's no free will, then it doesn't make sense for there to be moral responsibility. I think this makes sense. And then for any of you who think that moral responsibility is not important, I can't convince you otherwise. I think it's very important, and possibly the most important aspect of being a human being. But for the apologists of free will, they claim that our desires, our guts, the gut bacteria, our moods, the environment, right, whatever traumas we might have had when we were young, and our genetic inheritance from our parents, these, at the most, are influences. They don't determine what we do, or what we think. They just influence what we do and what we think. But then again, we know that certain people who have very significant genetic disturbances, right? Mental deficiencies caused by genetic inheritance or genetic mutation, that genetic inheritance is determinative of their behavior in a way that goes against the idea of free will. So my idea, the space of free will, because I'm a defender of free will, because as I said, if there's no free will, there's no moral responsibility. The space of free will is actually this half a second. So in this half a second, a decision has been made somewhere in our bodies, either in the brain or in the guts or somewhere else. The decision has been made, and in this half a second, I become aware of this decision, and I can choose to reject it. If this is true, if this half a second, this time in which I can override whatever particular desire or impulse I have, if I can change that, there is free will. This is the idea. Half a second. So it brings us then to an idea of a new kind of moral conceptual scheme. I call it a biological or somatic morality. A morality that's based in the body. And it's an idea of morality that's not based in moral reasoning, practical reasoning, ever since the Enlightenment, or from Kant, if you consider Kant's categorical imperative. We figure out what is moral by using our minds, rationality, right? But the idea of biological morality is that somehow moral ideas and impulses actually come from the body. and then in my idea, they come from the guts. Why? The pictures of the babies. So as infants, our very first introduction to suffering is through the gut sensations of hunger, thirst, right? Satiety, being full. These gut sensations for infants are the very first time that we know what suffering is, right? This is our introduction into the idea of morality. Because to me, in any type of moral conceptual scheme, suffering, this idea of suffering, empathy, this idea of suffering is essential. And we learn it from our guts as infants. This is the idea of biological morality. And this idea of biological morality is what they call moral realism. A morality that's based on moral laws, the Ten Commandments, right? Or some deity telling you what to do. These are abstract entities or ideas of the mind, rational ideas. A biological morality is based on the body. So there's a moral thought experiment, and I'm not sure how much time we have. I'll go quickly. What if one day you walk to work, this is a famous moral thought experiment, you see a kid who's obviously drowning in a small pool of water. What do you do? If you use moral reasoning, certain things go through your head. Is there anybody around? Is it really that shallow? Should I call the police? Oh, I just bought these clothes. I don't want to get them wet. Or I can't be late again to work. I'll get fired, right? Moral reasoning is actually a waste of time. And it's not the way that these moral dilemmas should be approached. The appropriate way from the perspective of biological morality is to follow the gut impulse, what your guts tell you to do when you see a situation like this. And this type of situation cannot be confined to just something that's within proximity. So it's in any encounter with suffering anywhere geographically. We should follow the gut instinct, the gut sensation, the moral gut sensation. But the problem is, some people, and we have to just accept this, just as some people are born smart, some people are born stupid, some people are born immoral. Their gut sensations are going to tell them the wrong thing. Or they will reject their gut sensation because of free will in that half a second. They'll just walk by. And we know how many anecdotal examples there are of people, of women being raped, right, in public, and nobody does anything. Right, the famous case in New York, I think her name is Kitty Genovese, I forgot her name. This is very common that people will just ignore. They won't follow their moral impulse. We just have to accept this. Okay, I'm getting to the end and the last slide. So we get back to Nietzsche. So my original, I believe, contribution to Nietzsche scholarship is the etiology, the cause of Nietzsche's insanity. Why did Nietzsche go insane? So when I went to school over 20 years ago, I was taught that Nietzsche went insane because of tertiary syphilis, that he had gotten syphilis from a prostitute sometime, who knows when, and at that time there was no cure for syphilis, right? And then it remains latent, and then it eventually destroys your brain. This was the old interpretation of why Nietzsche went insane. But now, doctors and nutritionists have gone back to Nietzsche's story, and they think it actually wasn't syphilis, that there's no evidence that it was syphilis. Doctors at the time said it was syphilis because they didn't know why he went insane. So my theory is that it was caused, his insanity was caused by his gut microbiome. Why? What is my evidence? So throughout Nietzsche's life, he tried so many crazy crackpot diets. So for a while, he would only eat fruit every single day. And what did this cause? Obviously, it caused diarrhea and indigestion all the time. But he persisted with this diet until he finally realized this is a stupid idea. Then he switched to a diet of only eating meat every day. Obviously, this causes insomnia, constipation, other issues. And then he would try some other crazy diet. He was also a vegetarian for a while, and he was converted to eating meat by Richard Wagner. Right? I think Wagner told Nietzsche, only real men have to eat meat. And his gut microbiome, Nietzsche's, was essentially German. So the picture there, that's his birthplace. He was born in that house. This is the church in which he was raised. His father was a pastor. His gut microbiome would have been essentially German. And he revolted against it. And his revolt against his own physiology matched his philosophical project of what he called reevaluating all values. Nietzsche was against all the Christian values, all the moral ideas that he had received from his parents and from his schooling, and all these ideas of trying to revolt against everything that he was taught matched his revolt against his gut microbiota. That's why I think he went insane. And in fact, his grave is there. It is possible, maybe sometime in the future, that they could dig up the body and check his DNA, and we can find out what he had been eating. And we can see why did he go insane. I just seriously doubt this will ever happen. Maybe sometime in 100 years, right? There's the story of Salvador Dali. They just dug up his body to find out if he fathered this illegitimate child. Turns out he didn't. So that is my original contribution to Nietzsche scholarship. I've never read any biography of Nietzsche that ever blamed his gut microbiome. So this is my theory. This is the end. I guess we can take questions.
Thanks, James. That was really, really, really fascinating. I'm glad you mentioned syphilis, because actually that was the only reference to sexuality and reproduction in their entire talk. And of course, in terms of any kind of analysis of will, morality in human actions and human lives, how can you not discuss sexuality and eros and reproduction? Because you basically reduced it to the brain and the gut. But, yeah.
Between consenting adults with functioning prefrontal cortexes, right, I don't think there is sexual morality. I don't think morality applies to whom consenting adults have sex with or what they have sex with. This doesn't matter to me. I don't think morality applies to it. That's why I don't really mention it. Does that answer? Does that make sense?
Well, it doesn't answer, majority of our lives, right? Because what motivates so much of one's behavior, right, is, according to other philosophers, other psychologists, one's own experiences, certain sexual desire, drive to reproduce, and so forth, right? So it also affects moods, it also shapes behavior, produces all sorts of actions and all of that. So it's very tricky because, obviously Nietzsche is a very interesting figure in that respect because he did have a lot of sexual problems, right? I don't think he ever had a girlfriend. He was never married.
Louis Salome, he had a girlfriend, but I don't think they ever had sex.
Well, this is exactly, yeah. So how can one trust like a kind of a theory of ethics or any kind of explanation of human experience from a person that's so alienated from their body in a certain way, maybe totally in touch with the gut, but completely out of touch with, the sexual part.
Well, you ask yourself, is a sexual relationship between two consenting adults through marriage or something, is this normal sexual morality? I don't even like to consider what is normal sexual behavior and what is abnormal. But about impulses, right? Let's say for pedophiles. If pedophiles have an impulse to have sex with children, if they have a functioning prefrontal cortex, they have half a second. They can stop it. They don't have to act on it, right? Supposedly, I might have some crazy sexual ideas. I might want to hump the cat or something, but I prevent myself from doing this, right, in this half a second. if I have impulse control. And then the point I was making with young people, supposedly young people with immature brains lack impulse control. And that's why young males are responsible for most violent crime. But about Nietzsche, he used to go regularly to prostitutes. This is sort of a normal functioning sexual relationship, isn't it? You don't have to be married and have sex with one person, do you? Can't one just go normally to prostitutes? I make no moral judgment about that if they're consenting adults. They can go to Amsterdam. But I guess your point is right. You know, how can Nietzsche be some sort of inspiration for a type of morality? Well, I actually based the whole talk on one sentence. All prejudices come from the intestines, on one sentence. You know, it's just food for thought. You know, I have to say that I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a doctor, right? If I were a doctor, I'd probably be wearing better clothes. Take everything that I said with a grain of salt. I could be full of shit, you know? I could be. This is a story that I'm trying to tell you that I hope makes a certain amount of sense. And I think it's a story that's beginning to match what they call neurogastroenterology, that there are specific effects from bacterial balances on our brains. I think this is true. I think this is true. But all the other details, you know, maybe it's wrong. It's possible. Again, I don't know if I answered your question.
Actually, I feel it is a very valuable lecture, and I like it very much. And you draw our attention for something, many of them, at least myself, I did not take it into consideration. But the proposal of the value and the limit of the effect of intestine, small intestine or large intestine, and the effect between the two-way effect between brain and intestine. Actually, I believe with you, it exists, but how much its weight, how much its coefficient in the behavior and the moral of people. So your proposal is that this coefficient or the weight of this relation and equation, I mean between brain and intestine, is higher than other factors. To me, this proposal needs, I believe that it needs more scientific experiment and observation. It could be sometimes in the time of starving and hunger, it could be clear that it is big or heavyweight effect on human behavior. And maybe in a good situation and in perfect world, it will be very minor behavior. I don't know, but what I believe, it needs more observation and more scientific test.
The study of the gut microbiome is new. This is only within maybe 10 or 20 years that scientists have realized these effects, gut sensations, these effects of the guts on the brain. There needs to be more empirical studies. And unfortunately, a lot of the empirical studies are funded by food corporations, drug corporations. So they have certain biases, right? So some of the studies are wrong, probably wrong. So it will take some time before scientists really figure out exactly which bacteria makes you vote for which particular political party. But eventually, it's very, very possible. But how can the gut's effects be determinative? This, again, we know when, for instance, we have terrible food poisoning. When you have terrible food poisoning, then your guts are fairly determinative of your behavior. This, I think, we know. It's when the guts are working well, how does this affect what we see and what we do. And, or actually, I didn't mention it, what we think is the truth, right? Our moods affect what we think is true as well. So there does need to be more studies about this. Yes, and there will be. I probably won't be doing them.
I am German, and I'm not so happy to see Nietzsche reduced to a gut-feeling thinker, since I think he's really a complex and very contradictory thinker, and it wouldn't be a good idea to deduce from one of his sentences the whole complex of Nietzsche's thinking. We have a bad example of such a reduction, which were the National Socialists, who also tried to reduce Nietzsche to a certain phrase. So I would rather like to claim to keep him open and to also leave open the question of his madness, which may result also of gut problems, but mainly of his attempt to think at the limit of the possible thinking, which might drive somebody crazy.
I totally understand. I agree with you. Nobody should be reduced to one sentence. I hope that's like an epitaph, right? I hope I'm not reducing the complexity of Nietzsche's thought to one sentence. I'm just trying to tell a story inspired by Nietzsche's one sentence, and then give a possible explanation, a possible one, for his insanity, and to approach a new idea of biological morality, which actually isn't quite Nietzsche's idea. And he was contradictory. This is, I totally agree with you. Yes. But I don't think I'm trying to pigeonhole him just to his intestines. Although that would be interesting, maybe as an art project or something. I don't think I'm trying to do that. But I agree with you.
Hi. Good lecture, but I have some doubts about the percentage of the facts that you mentioned in this lecture. Because our mood, our emotions, our brain influence from many things, not only from the gut. Maybe it affects the brain, but also the hormones affects also the brain. The heart affects the brain. Some new research, they talk about the center of memories is in the heart, it's not in the brain. So we cannot assure that this is correct 100%. We need time to be sure that this is good. But I think it's affect because we have in our traditional proverbs something support what you are saying. Like I will give it in English. Like the shortest way to the heart of the man is his stomach. Okay. Another one for the philosopher Ibn Sina, he said that the stomach and the intestine is the house of the sickness and the healing. So there is something like in our heritage support in science, in philosophy, and also in the traditional proverbs. But we have to take care of these new studies because it's like not sure 100%, but there is something. I believe that in that, okay? And for Nietzsche, it's not a German also. He is for us, all of us, all the human beings. So don't be sensitive, please. We are proud of him. I love him very much.
I totally agree with you. Obviously, our guts are not totally determinative of our behavior. Yeah, this is true. But if we have a new avenue for affecting our brains, for making us think better, we should study it, right? There's other views. There's psychoanalysis, right? Traumas, our histories, our childhoods affect us in very strong ways too. The guts are, and the gut microbiota is just one way. And I'm not trying to reduce everything to our guts. But other than when you have terrible food poisoning, then I do think it is determinative.
We have one more question here.
I don't know if you've mentioned it, but is there a test to measure the bacterial balance?
Yeah, you can. I don't know about here in Lebanon. I know in the United States and I know in Taiwan, you can send a fecal sample, I'm using a euphemism, you know what that is, to the lab, and they'll give you a report identifying all the bacterial strains that they can identify. So the problem is science has not progressed far enough to identify every bacterial strain that's in our guts. So it will be an incomplete picture. And nutritionists, scientists also don't know exactly which strains do what. So now they're still doing tests on that. And figuring this out is really hard for human beings because we're so complex. Our behavior is so complex. So for instance, if I eat this whatever excremental mood enhancer is, let's say I eat it over a month and my mood improves. I can't be sure that actually it's caused by this. Maybe I exercised more when I took this. Maybe I slept better when I took this and it was the sleeping better that improved my mood rather than this. Humans are very complex. It's hard to figure out, right, exact causes of which bacterial strain does what. But you can send a sample to the lab and you can check it out and they'll tell you.
Like only in the US?
Well, I don't live here. I don't know. Does anybody know here in Lebanon?
No, because, you know, there is this fashion of probiotics, which also help, I think, the balance.
Yes, yeah, this.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, they did a study in UCLA recently with middle-aged women, and they had them eat every day a minimal amount of yogurt, common everyday yogurt. And then they had a control group of middle-aged women who didn't eat the yogurt. And the women who ate the yogurt showed improvement in mood and well-being and even sleeping better and digesting better. But again, it's just one trial, right? One experiment. But they've done other experiments with types of fermented foods like sauerkraut or kimchi. Supposedly also not just improve your digestion, but are supposed to improve your mood as well. So, I mean, but you can send, I think you can actually send your sample to the United States if the Lebanese post office allows you to send such samples through the mail. I don't know. But I think you could, and you could get an analysis of your microbiome.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming. I hope it was interesting.